All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight is Monday, October 7th, 2019. The time is 7:01 p.m. This is the Town of Halifax Finance Committee. We're being recorded by Area 58. On tonight's agenda, meeting minutes, presentation by VHB regarding stormwater bylaws, meeting with the planning board to discuss special town meeting articles, confirm meeting date with Tri-Town Finance Committees, discussion of liaisons, correspondence and mail, reserve fund transfers, calendar, and public participation. We'll start with the meeting minutes which were from Monday, September 23rd, 2019. These were circulated via email. Many thanks to Linda for taking care of those. I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from Monday, September 23rd.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Alright. And then I'll keep that for the pile. Thank you. Okay. As long as VHB, if you're okay to go early, I know we had you on at 7:15, but if now is okay.
That's great. That's
Okay. All right. Awesome. So if you want, we can introduce ourselves. We're the Finance Committee.
I'm Cheryl Zarella-Burke.
I'm Fred McGovern.
I'm Melinda Tarsi, the chair.
I'm Bill McElroy. I think you two presented to the selectmen earlier this year, right?
Yep.
Okay, I saw this presentation, so I'm looking forward to seeing it again.
It wasn't me.
That's what we've updated. We've
No
updated it, so-
spoilers.
Yeah, no
please.
spoilers. Okay.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. So my name is Nick Cohen. I'm an environmental planner at VHB. I'm here with my colleague Lori Kennedy. And I'm an environmental planner, so not an engineer, so I'll try to keep this non-technical. But if there's any questions as I'm going, any acronyms or any words that I use that aren't familiar, please interrupt me. And we've left plenty of time at the end for discussion. As you mentioned, this is going to be similar to a presentation that my colleague Annie Bastonia gave last spring. But we've updated it, and it's really focused on these bylaws for this year. So there's a little bit of context, and then we'll get into those bylaws. So here's an outline of what we'll be talking about, a little bit of context for what stormwater is and why it matters for Halifax. Get into some of the water quality regulations that inform some of our work, and then get into those stormwater bylaws, and that's really what we're here to talk about tonight. And as I mentioned, leave plenty of time for discussion and some ideas for next steps for going forward. So first question you might ask is, what is stormwater? And I often think it helps to think about what stormwater is by thinking about what stormwater isn't. So the picture on the left is from some conservation land here in Halifax. And in that context, rain and snowmelt will fall on that landscape and be absorbed and infiltrated, taken up by plants and soils. Whereas in developed or impervious or non-absorbent areas, that water doesn't get absorbed. And on the way, it picks up things like oil, like you see in the picture. It might pick up dog waste or trash or anything else that's on the ground and go into the nearest water body, either directly or via drain, like in the picture here on the right. This is a schematic that shows that in a little bit more detail. So in places like Halifax, the stormwater is going to run off the impervious areas or non-absorbent areas into a drain, down into a catch basin, into a pipe, and eventually out into the nearest water body. And on the way, it's going to pick up things, like I said, like dog waste or oil or anything else that's on the road there. In places like Halifax, that's different from your septic system. That's largely capturing the house waste, things from your toilet or your sink. And generally that's separate from the stormwater system. Although, as I'll talk about later, sometimes those things get mixed up if there's an overflow or if someone's illegally connected into the storm drain system. And those are the types of issues that we're going to be talking about today. In Halifax, the stormwater system is things like pipes, catch basins, man-made swales, anything that conveys stormwater in that's man-made. So stormwater can lead to impacts like localized flooding. It can lead to water quality issues like erosion, toxic algae, which I know is an issue here or has been an issue here, bacteria, and even beach closures, as well as things like invasive plants. So for Monpont ponds, high nutrients can be a contribution to the cyanobacteria or the toxic algae. It's certainly not the only contribution, but as nutrients are get in there in excess levels, that can lead to the issues that we see. And stormwater can be a contribution to that because normally those nutrients would be absorbed or taken up by plants or soils in an undeveloped area. But in a place where it's more developed, those nutrients are going to tend to run off and end up in the water body in more concentrations than they would be otherwise. And so the regulations that we're talking about today are here to, or exist to try to deal with those sorts of issues and head them off ahead of time. So dealing with things like construction sites or development sites or areas where those types of water quality issues might originate from. So that we don't have news stories like this that I know Kathy dug up and has dealt with over the years. And so that's the kind of issues that we're talking about here, dealing with these kinds of water quality issues. So as part of that, there's context. Water quality regulations provide some context for the ways to approach these sorts of issues. In the US, the Clean Water Act is our primary water quality regulation, and it deals with pollutants to water bodies from point sources, or discrete conveyances is often how they're referred, which basically means a specific spot. So a pipe, a man-made channel or canal or anything like that. And the MS4 permit, the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit, is a permit for those types of issues as they relate to drainage. So when that stormwater gets into a specific pipe or into a drainage system, it then is regulated by this permit. It's a general permit, which means that in urbanized areas that have these types of systems, that permit applies sort of across the board for those municipalities. And it applies to publicly owned drainage systems. But those publicly owned drainage systems are responsible for dealing with the drainage or pollutants that come off of private properties, and ordinances and regulations and bylaws are one way to approach that I'll be getting at in a minute. It was first issued in Massachusetts in 2003, and a new permit came out in 2018, and the bylaws that are required are under that context. So I mentioned it covers urbanized areas. This is the map of Massachusetts that shows those areas in red hatching, either based on the 2000 census or based on the 2010 census. And for Halifax, that covers a good chunk, but certainly not all of the town. And so there's a little bit of flexibility in terms of where you apply the requirements under the permit to the whole town or just the urbanized areas. And there's a little bit of strategy there in terms of how you address that. It might make more sense to just have the regulations apply everywhere, and then you don't have to be it's not quite as complicated, but the permit is for urbanized areas only. And that's some of the strategy that we'll be talking about over the coming months, certainly beyond tonight. This is just an overview of the permit. It has these 6 minimum control measures, or MCMs, that range from things like doing public education and outreach to maintaining town-owned properties so that they don't contribute to stormwater pollution. The bylaws that I'll be talking about cover these 3 MCMs, or minimum control measures: illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site runoff control, and post-construction site runoff control. And so those are the areas where there are bylaws and ordinances that apply to these areas that are to be developed. And the idea for those bylaws are to protect water resources in Halifax. As I mentioned, other towns and municipalities that have this permit are doing or have done the same thing. And it's all towards protecting water resources so that those types of issues that we saw in the Montponset Ponds or other water quality or health issues can be avoided or at least mitigated. Again, these are the 3 bylaws that are required under the MS4 permit. They relate to illicit discharges, construction site runoff control, and post-construction stormwater management. And I'll talk about each one now. An illicit discharge, the first question here you might ask is, what is an illicit discharge? It's basically anything in the stormwater system that shouldn't be there. So it's any connection, any pollutant that gets in the storm drain that shouldn't be there because of, it could be a septic system that's illegally tied in by accident or by negligence. It could be construction waste that is dumped into a catch basin. It could be spills, or it could be a cracked pipe. Any of those would count as an illicit discharge. And in this case, this picture here is showing a roof drain that was connected into a floor drain that was then going into the storm drain system, as it should not be. So under the permit, the bylaw regulation needs to provide legal authority to prohibit, investigate, eliminate, and enforce these types of illicit connections, and have an enforcement action or enforcement manner for them to be enforced against. The next bylaw is construction site runoff control, and this is applicable to all construction activities that result in land disturbance greater than or equal to 1 acre, and that's the threshold. And it needs to include sediment and erosion control practices at construction sites, control for construction waste or construction debris, so things like concrete washout or any debris or litter that might be on a construction site, and it needs to require an enforcement mechanism including site plan review, inspection, and enforcement. The flip side of that is the post-construction stormwater management bylaw, which has a similar same threshold as sites that disturb greater or equal to 1 acre that discharge to the MS4. It needs to have some requirements for constructed stormwater treatment features on the project site. So those can be things like rain gardens or other infiltrative practices that keep stormwater on site. Long-term operations and maintenance procedures, a way for as-built to be submitted, and encouraging low-impact development or green infrastructure site planning, which is things like, I said, like rain gardens or infiltrative practices as opposed to just pipes. One question that commonly comes up is how this relates to the Wetland Protection Act. Is anyone from the Conservation Commission here? Great, so this might be of particular interest. It's often come up with conservation commissions. So the MS4, as I mentioned, is based on urbanized areas. This is that same map we saw earlier. And it applies to those areas that discharge to the MS4. In this case, it applies to part of Halifax. The Wetlands Protection Act, on the other hand, applies to wetland resource areas, which may or may not overlap with the MS4. So just as an example, here's an area that there's likely wetlands along here, but it's not in the red hatched area, so it's not in the MS4, but likely is under the jurisdiction of the Wetlands Protection Act. So in addition to jurisdictional differences, there's also differences in terms of the requirements. The wetland rules, they must comply with 10 standards, which are listed here on the right. And MS4 projects, on the other hand, have a threshold of 1 acre, and they must comply with all except stormwater quality, water quality standard number 4. And there are more stringent standards under the MS4 permit with regard to water quality than the Wetlands Protection Act. Lastly, with the MS4 permit, off-site mitigation is allowed for redevelopment projects. So there's a slight nuance difference there. Both are dealing with water quality, but a little bit difference in terms of approach and jurisdiction. So as I mentioned, we left time for discussion to hear from you all and begin some discussion of next steps and potential ways to move forward. We understand that Charlie has begun working on some drafts for these bylaws and wanted to sort of open it up for discussion about the way forward to get these out there. These are the discussion questions that I was thinking of as I was reviewing some of the information that Charlie provided, but certainly open to any questions and a good discussion here. I'll just go through these just to kind of generate some conversation, but then it'll be open forum. So the first, I think, question that comes up in a lot of meetings like this is which town body or bodies is going to be responsible for these requirements? And as I went through the presentation, there's some common responsibilities. There's review, there's approval, there's inspection, and there's enforcement. And it's probably worth a strategic discussion about who makes sense to do one or all or some combination of those things. And my colleague Lori has some experience dealing with different municipalities and how they approach this, so we can certainly provide some examples from other towns and cities and other permittees and how they approach that. The next question I thought of is what Halifax-specific details might be incorporated into the bylaws or regulations. One approach in general in Clean Water Act regulations is some flexibility. I mean, there are the standards, but then it's not the EPA or anyone else saying we have to do it this way. There are some standards, but then there's local flexibility to some extent in additional elements to include or approaches or responsibilities. So that's another piece to consider. And then lastly, what next steps we should consider to get these bylaws moving forward and passed in the near future. So I'll leave these up there for questions. I'm happy to answer any questions and then open it up to Charlie and the rest of you to have that lively discussion. Thanks.
You mentioned the MS4 is based on population density. Do you have the exact number?
I don't off the top of my head. It's based on what the census defines as urbanized areas.
Yeah, that's why I was coming back, and then we have a census coming up, and it's like, so we're seeing part of Halifax is in there now.
Yep.
So my concern was, when we do the census, are we going to then see a shift in like those existing areas or other areas that are not covered right now are going to shift over there?
Yeah, my sense is, at least in this permit period, that wouldn't happen because it's tied to when the permit came out.
Okay.
And so this is likely the map that we will have for at least this permit term.
No, but you're absolutely right. So the permit's a 5-year permit.
Okay.
So it became effective in 2018. So in 2023, there will be a new permit, and it's going to be based on the urbanized area of the 2020 census.
Okay.
The other thing is, if you're in that urbanized area and population shifts to a different area, that area still stays covered by the MS4 permit, even if it's not technically urbanized anymore.
So what's ever there now will always
Will always stay in, and it'll just grow.
And actually, if you notice on this one, they have the 2000 census
Mhm.
NARC and then the 2010 to
Yeah.
show that change and that they're all.
I see that.
Yeah, Kathy?
Really basic question, and maybe this is odd, but could you explain to me why the word permit is used for what, rarely we're being told what we have to do. There's some standards for good reasons, correct pollution, but why is it called a permit?
Sure. So that's some Clean Water Act history.
Okay.
Before going back, let's say centuries, you could do whatever you wanted with your water body, and you could dump your tannery waste or your factory waste or whatever it might be. And as the Clean Water Act was developed, the way the system works is that there are permits that allow you to discharge to water bodies, and there are parameters that define what can be in your discharge, when you can discharge, and it depends on the permit. So the MS4 permit is that, let's say, permission to discharge a municipal drainage system to water bodies of the U.S. under the Clean Water Act. And if you had a factory, you might have a permit to discharge something else to waters of the U.S., and it would be a different kind of permit, but it's all under that broader framework.
Oh, okay, so like a treatment plant having a groundwater discharge permit.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a different permit, but it's the
Yes,
same general
yes,
idea of like,
yes.
they're allowed to do that. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
That's an oversimplified version.
No,
but
that's fine.
Sure.
My question was on the jurisdiction in terms of either draining to wetlands or the MS4 systems.
Yep.
Ultimately, at some point or another, things tend to drain to wetlands or the MS4 areas one way or another. I think the draft that was circulated doesn't distinguish whether or not you're actually in, a 100-foot buffer zone or 200-foot riverfront to those jurisdictional areas.
Mhm.
So wouldn't that essentially just bring everything into being subject to this permit to some degree, provided it trips the acreage disturbance threshold?
So that's some of the strategy that I mentioned, that municipalities, or some towns that I've spoken to have said, bureaucratically and sort of jurisdictionally, it's easier for us to just have this blanket. And then others might say, we can make this work if we sort of want to be more targeted in where the MS4 jurisdictions are. And that's the kind of flexibility, let's say, that you might have. And that's I think, open for the best way to make that work.
So is it intended to basically be a blanket coverage for pretty much everything, unless something drained to like a low-lying area that didn't ultimately discharge someplace else?
You mean for the MS4?
Or, I guess, pulling the stormwater permit into the requirement to actually file something with either planning or conservation?
If it meets those thresholds, and and that would be one, like I said, one way to do it, to make it townwide, because some portion of the town is in the MS4 area. But that's not the only way that it has to be done.
So if you're in the MS4 area, what's the fees for a permit? And does the town pay the permit, or is it an individual who has a 5-acre lot and it's sloping to the wetlands? Do they have to come up with a plan for that and then pay a fee yearly, or how does it work?
So the plan part is pretty much in there. There is a plan that site plan review is part of the permit. The fees and how that works and who pays and the town's jurisdiction, that's where different towns, I think, take different approaches. Has that been your experience, Lori?
Yeah,
I mean, lots
so-
of fees, and then there's,
Right.
I think, the cost and who administers it is where I think Halifax would determine what works best for them. I don't know if you have examples of.
Well, so I just want to distinguish between Halifax's permit or authorization to discharge, and that's granted by EPA, and Halifax doesn't have to pay anything for that. So Halifax is covered under the MS4 general permit, and then there's the bylaw, the local bylaw, and you can set the fee however you want. So it might be like a developer has a project that meets the 1-acre threshold and has to apply for a stormwater permit, local stormwater permit, so they pay a $100 fee, $200, whatever you set it at, and then that initiates the process for them to go through review and approval.
Who gets the money, ultimately?
Does
Does it get transferred to the state?
no,
Yeah,
that
it should
stays
stay in the
local.
general
That
fund.
pays for your local staff, your program, your, maintaining your stormwater system. Yep.
Well, this is more for Charlie. Charlie, you've drafted a bylaw, stormwater bylaw, that is in the warrant for the special town meeting. Who has jurisdictions, and did we do fees?
We don't have fees in the bylaw itself.
Okay.
It's going to have to be done by the agency that's going to be, in fact, dealing with the site plan. So my hope is that right now we could do a Concom or the planning board, and before the 20th comes around, 21st comes around, we'll have to make a decision one way or the other. But we do have revolving funds for bringing in outside consultants to review plans. The idea would be that the applicant would pay the fees for, be a standard, probably just do a standard fee, either that or we do it on a per acre basis, for instance.
So at this point, the bylaw doesn't specify whether it's under
No, it'd be left
jurisdiction
open
or
for either
planning
way.
board. But we would be deciding that by the
Yeah.
21st?
Right,
The draft is kind of confusing, it seems to identify both
Yeah,
parties.
right.
And it was unclear.
And that's why we're having this part of the conversation right now.
Okay.
So, John, just a question for Charlie. So are we going to be adding a revolving account specifically for the stormwater portion?
We could do it that way, or I think each of the boards, Health, Concom, and Planning Board all have revolving funds right now. We could separate it out, so there's, I'm making this up, Conservation Commission, Wetlands revolving account for consultants, Conservation Commission, Stormwater revolving fund for consultants.
When are we going to make the decision, or who's going to make the decision on who is going to be the stormwater authority? From reviewing the bylaws, it probably should be under conservation, because at least what I read, I know you're saying 1 acre, but if you're in that jurisdictional area, if you disturb more than 5,000 square feet, that triggers the permitting process.
We're probably going to bump that to 40, because having talked, for instance, to Kathy and other people, even on an acre lot, many times there's more than, if someone's building a single-family house, more than 5,000 square feet is going to be disturbed. Now, doesn't mean that they don't need other permits, but in terms of the stormwater, we're probably going to bump it up to try and be less intrusive to whether it's homeowners or anybody else who's building. If there's a Walmart, obviously it's going to be more than 40,000 square feet, but by establishing 40,000 square feet or even slightly more, making it a little bit larger than our builder's acre, what we've eliminated is another requirement for new home owners or.
Well, some of them just want to repair their lawn, 5,000 square feet, it's going to trigger a permit requiring engineering and so
And that's
forth. So are we going to make these changes at town meeting?
Yeah.
Is there going to be a determination before we get to town meeting as to who is going to be the authority?
Well, that's what we're trying to do right now, between now and then, yeah. It may be that we pass over this bylaw, because we haven't been able to make the decisions we need to.
And we've got a time frame to accept the bylaw, don't we? Do we have a time frame?
It should have been done months ago as it was. We originally were going to bring this into the May town meeting, but between, the bylaw itself, as is right now, is 20 pages long.
Correct.
Trying to deal with that at that annual town meeting was going to be a very difficult work.
Okay. So we're overdue to get the bylaw, so if we can, tweak things out. So if, let's say you determine that the Conservation Commission is going to handle this, which my opinion is that's where it should be with runoff and siltation barriers and reviewing plans. I mean, there's no one, the planning board does not have a representative that can go out and handle that. And even I think that
I am an engineer by practice, so I do that for work.
No, but I'm saying that if you're in this area, and as the bylaw is right now, and you want to do your lawn law, if you disturb 5,000 square feet, then you need to have someone to go out, review the plan, and then you're going to need someone to review the installation of siltation barriers, and I'm sure that's going to change. These are a couple of the bugs that I saw in the bylaw. So are there going to be some other funds to potentially put on additional personnel?
No, at this point, I don't have any plans of doing that. I want to go through the permit system, and that if someone applicant comes in, they'll pay the fees for the outside consultant.
Yeah, it's on the
Sandy?
applicant to take care of it themselves.
Sorry, Sandy's been
If
waiting to
I
speak.
could just ask, we have a representative from Concom, we have a representative from planning. Do you feel that it should fall under Concom jurisdiction, Jerry?
We deal with it all the time now.
Right, because it follows a lot of the same wetland.
Right.
How do you feel, Carlos?
I
But you deal with site plans anyways.
Inherently, a lot of times, if you're in wetland buffer zones anyway, you're putting all these same plans together regardless. So I think a lot of towns, municipalities that I've seen almost have it get rolled into the conservation permitting as a kind of default approval of the stormwater management plan when you approve your notice of intent.
Right.
So I've seen them combine that way too, but then that also brings in conservation to all the other development projects where they wouldn't normally be involved, where the planning board might
It
already
might
be
be in
involved.
an area that's.
Not within
in
the
the-
wetland jurisdiction,
Right,
it's still
but
subject to
still
the
subject
stormwater.
to that. But I guess my feeling, just looking at bylaw, is it probably should fall under the conservation just because there's so much overlap, but also something that the planning board would have to definitely keep in mind, so that if something, a site plan came in front of the planning board and you knew it was in that district, you would have to make sure that Concom got.
So the way it's currently set up, the
Ready.
planning board hires the consultants that reviews all the stormwater management reports, so we're the ones that administer the reviews as it stands today.
So then you would have to
we're already
send
looking at
them,
those
yeah.
single projects, so, I don't know, it just shifts the burden back to the conservation board, we're also looking at that.
Right.
So it creates some complications and potentially brings conservation into other projects where they otherwise might not be involved.
So if conservation is say, the authority on planning, you could have a checklist that maybe now you add to it and it asks the questions, you know, is this triggering an MS4 issue here? And if so, have you, contacted the Conservation Commission? There could be some form of cooperation there.
Yeah, I suppose, but again, at the same time, if it's an upland area that just ultimately drains 1,000 feet downstream to a stream, that would otherwise require conservation review. Now conservation's involved in reviewing the stormwater reports and the plans and all the rest of that, whereas the planning board's already doing that. I don't know if that's good or bad, it's just
Well, it's gonna-
another
it's gonna-
overview and
The thing is,
timing.
it needs to be one agency or the other, because I'm not saying this would happen necessarily, but if you have both agencies on the checkoff list, and one of them says yes, and one of them says no.
Yeah, I agree, you can't have both.
I think, and in the past, and I'm talking about the very ancient past, like 25 years ago, we had had projects that came before the town that were both planning and zoning, and we would have joint meetings.
Yeah.
And I think that certainly, that would be something that Concom and planning could get together if they had, for one presentation of a project, if they knew it was gonna be in the MS4 area. Just an idea, that's where the jurisdiction was gonna lie with the conservation, but then it wouldn't require, like, making the people who are doing the development jump through multiple hoops, do one presentation to both boards, and
And I will
it's just a way to
say,
handle it.
bumping it to 40,000 or a little bit more, make it a true acre rather than builder's acre, probably brings down the number of projects that are trigger on this for
Yeah.
a dozen, maybe a year, if that. Just simply-
We don't see that.
You don't see that, I mean.
Right.
Just one other question, Charlie. Is that map going to be incorporated to be accepted versus, I have a little bit of a problem
It
with
is what it is, in the sense of, that's in that map that the feds, of course, the state.
Okay, is that going to be incorporated into our bylaw?
It doesn't have to be in the sense of, it is, meaning,
Just is what it is, right? It's not a
It is what
bylaw.
it is. My only concern is to make the whole town subject to the MS4.
and I wasn't planning on doing that.
No, I mean, as long as we can stay with whatever the government has said, that these are the jurisdictional areas, I didn't see that in there, so I just want to make sure that if that's going to be the case, then that's what the town is going to approve. If it does change in 5 or 6 years,
Right.
then these areas still remain in the MS4.
Which it
Yeah.
will.
Well, you could word it so that we go by the accepted map by the state,
Yeah.
and that way, if the map changes, it's still, we don't have to change the bylaw, we don't have to change the map, because the state changed the map.
State changed it, yeah.
Right.
So,
And then the planning board and
do anyway.
and conservation, they won't have to get involved with every single project. It's strictly going to be those projects going to be around the lakes and whatnot.
Well, that's not true, because everything within the town essentially will be subject to this permit, because everything will ultimately drain to some sort of resource.
But it's only those.
No, only these areas that are affected.
Yeah,
These are
Not
the
the
areas.
areas only, right? So
actually,
yeah.
there's some areas in South Halifax that aren't in the in any of those areas.
No,
On
I-
any of the hashtag, and they're not draining to any of those areas. They have their own wetlands.
There is a lot of areas in the southern half of the town there which do drain to wetland resources.
Well, eventually the wetlands-
Right,
Right.
wetland resources, but they're not necessarily within those
They're
areas.
not within the MS4, but
That's
there's
based on
permits for
population.
everything.
Right.
No, it's not. It's either based on draining to wetlands or within the MS4. It's either or, and the or brings everything in the town to within
Is it
jurisdiction for
either or?
That's where the distinction is between the Wetlands Protection Act and the MS4. So if you're asking, the or applies to, you'd have to deal with one of those two regulations. But if we're only talking about the MS4, then the Wetlands Protection Act piece can be put aside for that part of the parts of the regulations that are MS4 specific. I haven't seen a bylaw regulation that's MS4 specific, like for the MS4 area itself in a town. I've seen it only town-wide. I don't,
It
we have to,
generates a lot of confusion when it's not townwide, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I've not seen a town elect to limit it to only the MS4 area.
it's a question we could certainly pose to our statewide colleagues and find out if there's some examples of how that's been done.
So is the confusion that one street over, someone is asking, like the edge, like a flood line, and, oh, I'm 2 houses away, it doesn't,
And then what
How
is
many-
the process for appealing,
Uh-huh.
whether you are
Okay.
or are not within the MS4
Okay.
area,
And I do
Well,
look
we
at
have a
the map,
map that shows you where you're,
Right.
where you're located.
and, yeah,
and you can't change the map.
yeah.
So what are the distinctions of what applies within the MS4 versus in the non-MS4 areas? I missed the first couple of minutes.
Oh, sorry, sure. So one example might be, so the permit covers, you go back to, the permit covers much more than what I talked about. And there are some areas, just as an example, good housekeeping requires certain street sweeping requirements. And so that's one where a town might say, oh, we're only going to sweep in the MS4 area the amount of times that we're required to sweep in the MS4 area. And that way we can sweep less times in the other part of the town. Another client of mine said, well, actually, we'd rather just sweep everywhere the same amount of times. We'll just put that requirement everywhere because our trucks aren't going to know the difference and we're not going to want to worry about those differences. So that's not what we're talking about tonight, but that's an example of the type of issue. With the bylaw or with the bylaw that we've been talking about, it's these pieces that, let's get back to, these pieces that show that there's the jurisdictional difference between the MS4 and the Wetlands Protection Act. The Wetlands Protection Act based on wetland resource areas, the MS4 based on the urbanized areas. And then there's the actual sort of performance differences where the standards that are applied for the Wetlands Protection Act are all 10. The MS4 is all but standard 4, and there's specific standards for the MS4 that sort of replace the water quality standards under number 4. And then the MS4 permit has that threshold of 1 acre that can be less if the permittee decides that they want to make it less, but that's the standard or the threshold that's set by the feds to be 1 acre or more. So there's some overlap and there's some very clear
So
distinctions.
maybe I'm missing the point here, but my understanding of the way the bylaw, the draft bylaw is currently written, it said anything that drains to wetland resource areas without a distinction of being within the actual jurisdictional area would be subject to the stormwater permit. In addition to areas that are within the MS4, meaning that if you're 1,000 feet away, you just happen to be uphill of a wetland area, you could be considered draining to it, and thus pulling you into the requirement to file a stormwater permit. Is that the intent? And I think we touched on it, and I think you said that was purposefully written in such a broad way to allow the town flexibility to apply it generally.
Well, if we're going to do the entire town, it won't matter, because eventually everything drains.
But I guess that's my distinction. I want to clarify that it would in fact bring the whole town in, not just these MS4 areas, because pretty much every part of the town does ultimately drain.
Right, well, but again, that's what, either we do the shaded part of the map, and you disturb 40,000 plus square feet, and that invokes a permit, or we do the entire town, and you disturb 40,000 square feet, and that invokes a
All
permit.
right.
And it sounds to me like the applicability can be revised still, that maybe that's not set in
Well-
stone, but
Well, I think Collis's question is basically whether it's 5 or 40, the crucial question is whether we're just doing the shading or not.
Right, right now, I think the way it's written, it's very broad to include the whole town. Basically, anything more than 40,000 square feet of disturbance unless you're at the bottom of the bowl, basically would trigger the requirement for a permit. If that's the intent, that's fine, I just want to make people aware of what we're talking about.
And like Lori said, that tends to be the examples we've seen from other communities to head off any sort of confusion, and it may be simpler to implement because you just know that these thresholds and these triggers happen, and then it falls into that category without that extra step and the complication. But like I said, we can look into if there's precedents for ordinances and bylaws that are specific to the geographic MS4 boundaries.
If you have the wetlands map on there too, I mean, half the town will be covered. So it's not like we're doing nothing now.
Yep.
So you're saying you just want to implement more restrictions on people just in those areas because of the population? Is that it, or the census?
It's kind of a surrogate for how much impervious and how many pollutants, or how much, pollutant load is being generated. That's what they use. That's why they define it based on the urbanized area.
So a quick question on one of the benefits. Is this something that allows us to check off some boxes on some of the larger permits in terms of MS4 or other town-wide, bylaws, stormwater management requirements by implementing a stormwater bylaw and ultimately rules and regulations? Does that check off a couple boxes for us?
Yes, there are 3 required bylaws under the MS4 permit.
So there's,
Or bylaws that cover 3 specific
right,
requirements.
so there's the illegal discharge, basically someone going ahead and dumping stuff
Yep.
into. 2 is the active construction site, what's happening when you've got a construction going on. And we deal with some of that with the wetlands right now.
Yeah.
And then the same thing is for post-construction, because many times the hay bales or
Right, we go back
the
and,
retention basins or anything else are still there after we do post-construction.
Right, so the point being is that this is a requirement, we need to do it, and the minimum requirement is that you at least need to include the MS4 areas. So the thing that we have to think about is whether or not we want to hold down in or.
Yep. And the bylaw that I believe went around, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, but the bylaw that went around is mostly the vehicle requirements
Yes.
under this one. There's some overlap in that I think, if I remember right, the draft had site plan review, which if you are reviewing a site plan, you're reviewing a site plan for construction and perhaps post-construction. So there's a little bit of overlap, but it was almost exclusively that second bylaw there and less about the first and the third.
There was a requirement for stormwater reports being prepared in long-term O&M and other post-construction, continued BMP, maintenance checklists and all that stuff. So maybe calling it a stormwater bylaw as opposed to a construction period stormwater bylaw might be more appropriate.
I'm sorry, I'm missing something.
It did include stuff
Yeah.
above and beyond just your erosion controls and your construction.
Okay, I see what you're doing, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It morphed into a blending of 3.
And what we're looking at for number 1 is the possibility of being able to handle that by regulations. Some communities do it through the DPW or Board of Health for the illicit discharges without having another bylaw in place.
And the permit is written such that it's, I think, a regulatory, there needs to be a regulatory manner or regulatory approach. So it doesn't distinguish bylaw regulations, it just needs to be able to cover these things that I mentioned. And that's where it's for the permittees to determine in their own jurisdiction how they handle that, as long as they're meeting the requirements that I went through.
And then, is there a second step then where we have to develop our own rules and regulations, at which point we would identify the fee schedules and the process and all that above and beyond, which essentially works in tandem with the bylaw itself? And that does not need to be in place, or doesn't need to.
You need the bylaw for this works. Because, I mean, as it is, any bylaw that we pass this month, even if we do pass one, the AG's office gets 3 months to take a look at it.
Okay.
And then the rules and regulations don't have to go through that town meeting process, right? So then the rules and regulations, we can talk about the fees and how much for, revolving and different things, revolving contract and things like that.
Right.
So.
And the intent wouldn't be to collect fees from developers to fund the town-wide stormwater O&M, right? It's just for the construction part for that particular development.
Right. We have a separate line item right now in the budget for the town's own work that it has to, that graphic that had the 6 groupings. And so, as I mentioned, street sweeping is a perfect example.
Yep.
We're not going to fund street sweeping out of these fees. Street sweeping is a separate line item called stormwater that we have in the budget right now.
I will say that some towns are implementing stormwater fees, just like
Yes.
they do sewer and water fees,
Right.
that they are using to fund some of those costs.
And we're not going there yet because I'm not saying we ever will, but I have, how do I do this? Since we already have the stormwater line item in there, it's being funded under property taxes. If for some reason the town wants to go to a fee system, we still have that option, but I wasn't gonna propose that at this point, trying to throw that into the,
That's like, lots of,
yeah, baby bathwater probably is my situation.
So Charlie, at what point do these changes will be made? As
Well,
far as the square footage, prior to town meeting?
Prior to town meeting, because, yeah,
Okay, because under redevelopment, any land exceeding 5,000 square feet. And then under section 6, it's 5,000 square feet.
and that's why I want to go to 40, because I think there are too many cases for us to be able to handle well. And again, if the town at some point wants to lower that number, it can. I'd rather start at the higher number and see how well we can manage the situation.
So there's complete bylaw or regulation. I'll just briefly discuss that tonight, or you want to stay with
Well-
the idea that it's going to be?
Well, I know for the,
it's
for, we, as I mentioned, for the illicit discharge, I think, again, working with VHB, I think we can come up with examples of regulations that I won't have to bring to another town meeting or this town meeting. The post-construction, I need to take another look at and see whether I can fit that within bylaw during the next couple of weeks, or whether we'll need to have a second bylaw at the town meeting in May.
So the process is there, like for the Board of Health has the authority, the process is there. It would definitely still advertise and have hearings so that the public is aware.
Well,
It's
with
just would
with
be
the illicit,
unusual
well, the
for-
Board of Health, the illicit discharges, I mean, obviously, I think that in an appeals period, if someone was cited for illicit discharge, there has to be an appeals process or something like that. But it's not from what I saw, it's not a situation, there's a notice in the newspaper and there's a hearing.
Oh, no, I just meant for proposing the regulation.
Oh,
There's a
it could be,
process.
yes,
That we would follow,
Yep.
yes.
Sorry. Different hearings.
I don't want to get, I'm not jumping ahead on the process.
Are there any other questions?
So I take it we're non-compliant now because the
Right.
act went into effect in 2018. Is there a phasing period where we
It
have to be
actually
compliant?
was a requirement under the 2003 permit.
It used to be called stormwater, then it was stormwater phase 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, you're quite out. Sorry, I'm not sure if there's any nice way to put it, but yeah,
So
you're,
what happens if town meeting votes it down and it never passes?
Well, if it never ever passes, never ever.
Yeah, we're not paying
But if
penalties for this, are we?
somebody comes down and knocks on my door and says, hey, I'm fining you a lot of money,
It can happen.
work it over.
Yeah.
Charlie?
Would that be DEP or EPA?
That would likely be EPA, but
EPA.
they, in
Yeah.
certain cases, work together, I think, but
Yeah,
likely
they do,
EPA, but
right,
likely
right.
EPA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
EPA enforces the MS4 permit.
Charlie, in terms of the, for the FinCom recommendation sort of time frame, we allotted a significant amount of time before the special to go over anything else. I'm getting the sense that we've collected the information today, but maybe we should wait until that particular FinCom meeting to actually formally make our recommendations if they're gonna be,
21st.
on the 21st,
Yeah.
because there's
I
some,
mean,
there
I'll
might be some
inform you,
tweaks.
but I'm not going to come in Monday with all the changes on the 21st. If we're going to do any changes like going to 40,000 square feet,
Yeah,
like determining which body it's going to be and things like that.
yeah,
Probably sometime, probably by next Tuesday.
okay, we'll send it around over, and then over email, we can take a look and then actually talk, okay. Does the finance committee, does that sound good for you all to be able to take one last look at what'll become sort of the penultimate draft? And then we can talk about it before the, special?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I have one final question. So is there any experience that you can talk to about what the penalty is for another jurisdiction not being compliant or having a fine from EP or DPW?
Yeah, the highest fines I've seen are more for chronic sewage discharges. around 40,000. More commonly, the fines have been around 4,000 or 5,000. Those are more like administrative, like you didn't submit your annual report, or a couple times you were late, you might get a $4,000 or $5,000 fine. Somewhere in between is kind of you're not meeting your requirements. So maybe somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000. That's just what I've seen in the past, but I don't know how EPA is going to approach that now.
I think one other
I
key,
can send a list, actually. EPA provided me a list of all of the penalties that they levied under the 2003 MS4 permit. So I can send that if you want to look at it.
I think one other key thing is to show progress, which isn't to say that you wouldn't get fined because the bylaws aren't done, but it always helps to be able to show some progress that, we have this conversation, there's a draft, so the more the better, but obviously having it totally done is fully compliant. And, not from EPA, so I can't say one way or the other what they would do, but progress is definitely helpful regardless, and ideally getting the bylaws done is sort of the goal.
Right, thank you very, very much for coming in today.
So we're doing another public forum next week on the 15th, next Tuesday. Very much like this. This is more, not that the public wasn't, the public wanted to be here, that was great, but it's more devoted to people who are on boards and committees who might have some basic questions about what we're trying to do here. But boards and committees are welcome to.
Great. Thank you very much. So our next item on the agenda.
Oh, I do?
For the planning board.
I don't have to, do I?
No, but it would be nice if you could.
No one else from the planning board
Because
came.
no one else from the planning board is here, and you have planning board bylaws.
If you have any
bylaw
questions,
changes.
I'm happy to answer any
Yeah,
questions.
we did reach out and ask. We actually suggested a dual posting for us and planning board tonight, just because of the bylaws being proposed. I went to the open hearing and frankly came away with more questions than answers, which is why I suggested and hope that we could have a two-committee conversation about this, since the FinCom has to make recommendations on all these. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, but I was someone that didn't be here.
No, and I saw some of the video, and I saw that I was dubbed the author of these things, so.
Oh, my
You want to clear problems.
So you were on the camera. Yeah.
So just for the purposes of sort of public information and for our newest member Cheryl, the Finance Committee provides recommendations on all of the articles in the warrant, including the bylaws that we're going to talk about tonight. So really we're dealing with Article 1, Article 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, what?
Sorry, the different conversation, my apologies.
I heard mouse, so I said.
Yeah, it's a computer mouse.
It's not a real mouse.
Okay,
I think the planning board
we were going to add.
proposed start at 7.
Okay.
The others were proposed by the selectmen. Some, a couple of them were outside people who had the selectmen proposing because they were there after.
Thank you. All right, so
I think
what's
7 starts the planning board.
multifamily? Okay.
One, so if you wanted to ask him questions, where he's concerned, it was so bad.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, thank you. So we'll begin with Article 7. I won't read them out loud. So Article 7 as printed in your packet. City Town vote to, this is the definition of multifamily development.
Maybe you could just tell us what the difference
Yeah.
is. What was
Without
the
having it all in
change?
front of me, I'll have to go somewhat based on memory here. But I think the first change there was all of these, the general rule is that they either all go together or they don't go at all. because you can't cherry pick one and match the other one, otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah.
The intent was to try and clarify it and realign some of the terms so that they're consistent and refer to the same sections. So the first one there points to section 167.12a, and if I remember correctly, I think that just identifies or better defines the minimum lot size for a multifamily development and defined it to include 10 acres of upland as opposed to just 10 acres. So I think that was the intent there.
Well, this one, the Article 7 one I'm reading is to change multifamily development of 3 or more dwelling units on a single lot of land. A building intended and designed to be occupied by more than one family living independently in separate units, to multifamily dwelling, a building intended and designed to be occupied by more than 2 families. So is there going to be a difference now between duplexes and multifamily dwellings?
So that was the intent, because a duplex was identified as a multifamily dwelling, but because there was already a duplex definition, we felt that a multifamily dwelling was intended to be more than 2. Otherwise, a duplex kind of falls into this weird category where it's a multifamily dwelling and a duplex. So the intent there was to just clarify that these multifamily dwellings are intended for that higher density type development.
So then the duplex wouldn't have to have the higher,
No, the duplex is already in its own category with
it has its own, all right. Okay.
Any other questions on Article 7? Let's go to Article 8, see if the town will vote to amend 167-72 specific uses. The complete parcel must be under the ownership of the developer before a special permit is granted. 2, the complete parcel must be under the ownership of the developer, or evidence of secured interest in the purchase rights of the included parcels must be provided before a special permit is granted.
So the intent of that one was fairly straightforward. A lot of times, somebody proposing to develop a property doesn't outright own the land that they're proposing. It's a sale contingent upon them being able to get permits. So by not having that stipulation in there, it gives them the flexibility to pursue those permits and then close on the property after successfully obtaining them. If they can't obtain them for whatever reason, they still have the option to back out of the sale. So a lot of real estate transactions are done that way. We figured it made sense just to clarify that in that particular section.
Any other questions about Article 8? Article 9 deals with general density. So it's just going to force the multifamily developments to be built, so each essentially unit of a multifamily dwelling has to be on an individual lot.
We felt that's how it was intended to be written. The reason for changing this one, or the reason for proposing a change to this one was that it was a long sentence, and at the end of it, you have that except as hereafter provided, and it's kind of a catch-all caveat to allow for exceptions for basically whatever, for everything. And our understanding was that it was intended to basically say that you can't have anything built on a lot having less than the minimum requirements, period, and you can't build any more than one dwelling on a single lot except after provided herein, meaning that in the multifamily district, it was unclear whether or not you could have multiple buildings on a single lot. So to try and clarify what we thought the intent was, we just restated what was said elsewhere in the provisions to say that no more than one dwelling should be built on a single lot. except as hereinafter provided. And I think the intent of that was to clarify it, but I know there was a lot of back and forth at the last hearing that it was redundant. So to some degree, if that doesn't get revised, I don't think that that really changes much of anything. And I understand some people felt they made it more confusing.
And Carlos,
Yeah, the last sentence there was just clarifying that each building in a multifamily lot has to be built on its own lot, which is what we believe the intent was of the multifamily bylaws, so just restating that and attempting to just reinforce what was said elsewhere.
My suggestion would be to vote no on this one, especially I was at the hearing. Town council had a major issue with this, and it's based on the single lot business, and that's subject to a lot of litigation. Typically, single lots under subdivision control, multifamily dwellings aren't. And this is where all the confusion is, and hopefully we can square it away. But I think this is kind of a piecemeal approach to squaring it away, and it's very, very confusing. And my suggestion would be not to vote no on this particular one. And there's some others that go along, but you were at the meeting, and I had notes on it. The town council did indicate that the single lot business needs to be clarified.
Well,
And I don't know that it's going to be clarified in the courts or through some new changes in the bylaws, but there's a difference between single lots and subdivision control.
Yeah, I think that was my general sense. And this is just me speaking as one person, coming out of the public hearing, was that it was hard to follow between the issues that town council kept bringing up as to why certain things might not be appropriately worded or why they may be confusing, to then kind of square that with being able to make recommendations from the finance committee perspective. And I know that we're acting in an advisory capacity, and this isn't the budget that we're normally dealing with, but the amount of sort of disjuncture across the different bylaws, just from the perspective of someone on another committee, seemed to make the discussion at the public hearing kind of reflective of the confusion that folks have concerning the bylaws.
And I completely agree. It's very confusing, the individual versus separate lot, and what's a lot and what's not a lot, and whether or not there needs to be an individual house or a separate house on each lot, whether it's a piece of parcel or it's a lot. The whole thing's super confusing.
Yeah.
We're just trying to clarify it. The best thing I thought the legal counsel had was to rewrite the entire zoning section so that you can start from scratch and vote on, this is what we're gonna do, because like I was saying at the beginning, some of these make sense, but they only make sense if they refer to the other sections that are changed. If we change one or two and not the other, and all of a sudden it's worse than it started today.
Yeah.
And I think it's confusing today, and even making these changes will maybe try and resolve some of that confusion. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll make it worse if a couple
More litigation.
Yeah, and it's not to and to overlook all the effort that went into this, or to not appreciate all the work that goes into doing these kinds of things. It just seems like it seems very drafty still, if you will, and that, like you said, that there's parts that if one falls, all the other necessarily fall, and we can't vote certain ones up or down without the other one. So it just seems to be really
And I think what's even worse is that I think some of the other articles before we even get to these talk about the same topics. So if you approve one, and then you approve this next one that just changed a part of what you recently approved. I think the piecemeal approach is awful. But we're trying to move the needle a little bit in what we felt was a better direction. Certainly welcome to alternative approaches to try and clarify it, because that's the problem. We can't even interpret this in a way that can allow developers to have a clear understanding of what they can and can't do.
So do you, and again, you can either speak as a member of the committee or just from your perspective, do you get the sense that there's an appetite to, I don't know, it's a ton of work, and I don't say it lightly, but that to take that wholesale approach to just revise everything in one fell swoop and really like make sure everything is consistent internally?
I certainly think there is, and,
Yeah.
and that was the intent. The way that these came about was not intended to be separate articles.
Yeah,
We basically took a Word document of the zoning bylaw and
Yeah.
we made changes to the Word document, and the way they were tracked, they were just tracked as separate articles. So the intent was to try and bite off as much as we could. There were a number of elements that were in the sign bylaw. There were a number of elements that were in just other defined terms that don't have any relevance or cross-references in the actual bylaw itself, to make everything actually point to the right locations and to the right terms. If legal counsel was there to be able to support, or another engineering firm or some other consultant was willing, and we had the funds to be able to support that kind of effort, I would wholeheartedly support just doing it all at once, as opposed to, doing something here, doing something there, to eliminate these confusion items.
yeah, and I think to bring in like the Board of Health and Conservation and others too into that process earlier on, where applicable, like where each of those committees' work touches different parts of this, I think would also be really helpful.
Yep. If there's an appetite for that, I know that's the hard thing, is getting
Yeah.
everybody around to
Yeah,
change a 200-page document.
yeah,
Article 10, 11, and 12 are pretty much the same. Other languages in there. We really need to get some professional help, I think, with those particular bylaws.
Yeah, and Article 10 isn't language so much as it is just reinforcing some of the dimensional numbers.
Right. I don't know that any consideration has been taken into these in any cluster type zoning, so there should be a major overhaul of this, but, the emphasis is sometimes going on a little bit of a cluster zoning, instead of disturbing the whole 10 or 12 acres,
Yeah.
preserve 7 or 8 acres, and put your units in 2 or 3 acres. And that's not allowable in town, based on these laws.
And what I would say is that there wasn't wholehearted agreement to every single piece of this bylaw. This was the best attempt at getting the members that were present to agree on something, which we felt was better. I personally feel that the cluster concept works a lot better, and to have the flexibility of having multiple buildings on an individual lot makes sense. I think it would take a lot of rewriting to be able to clarify that.
And I think that, we need to speak to our town fathers to see if they can find some help. Because you got 4 or 5 member boards that some have, some don't have the experience, and they're kind of being corrective. Our bylaws are being changed to either prevent something,
yeah.
and then when we find that there's a problem, now they're corrective bylaws. We need a major overhaul, and we need to really look at whether, does the town want cluster zoning? Does the town want everything spread out?
Well, and I think in this way, we end up writing bylaws for all the scenarios we've already seen, instead of sitting and thinking about what might be coming down the line, and really being a little bit more proactive about the kind of development we may see in the future, as opposed to just like reacting, like you said, to everything that we've already seen that may not even be applicable anymore. And then someone 10 years from now is going to be sitting in these chairs going, why did they put that in there? It's so old.
So I guess the question on wholeheartedly or whole scale revising the zoning bylaws to essentially reissue a new revision for the complete zoning section of the bylaw? What's the effort there?
I hope we won't have to do a complete, because you put it up, it's a significant. And the thing is, you get, I agree, one part, let's put it this way. You should be able to do multifamily without doing signs, and vice versa. They really,
Yeah.
the intersection between those two sections of the bylaw is just, the Venn diagram on those is two separate subjects. So, so we should be able to do one and not the other thing, so that in the sense of, we shouldn't have to do the entire bylaw.
Yeah.
Come up with a revised bylaw.
But is there a different process if you were to take the entire bylaw and
No.
does it still go through town?
Yeah.
Or it's either a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the whole thing?
Well, unless somebody moves the amendment or town meeting floor or something like that, but yeah.
And that tends just to confuse people more. So You could,
Well, it can, I mean, the thing was that when we did it back 50 years ago, the bylaw was a lot shorter, and it was doable because it was the first real zoning bylaw we had. Now it's grown during the last 50 years, we threw a lot of stuff in there. And so it's harder to do a wholesale change, saying, okay, I'm making this up, the 2019 version of the bylaw, we're replacing it with the 2020 version of the bylaw. Here's the one, it's, as you mentioned, like, say it's 100 pages or something like that. Just the sheer logistics gets difficult. Because the way we operate is, in essence, we print up a booklet, almost would be the size of the town report, to send to everybody.
Do you think there's an appetite within the planning board to look at the whole bylaw and change it?
Yes, I think it's unlikely that the various boards in town will agree on what the changes should be.
So I agree with that. Different people are going to think different things, but are you saying that the planning board would want to do a complete revision from page 1 to page 100?
I would think that would be the best approach if it was more logistically palatable to the town to be able to take that approach. I think it would be a better end result. But
So-
if you did tackle, one topic at a time, whether it's, density, dimensional rate, whatever it is, signage,
Yeah.
do those together, I think that works as well. But I guess, the process, again, how do you go about
You were
doing
just
that?
talking, the two of you were just talking about cluster zoning, and I know past planning boards have been against cluster zoning. They did not want any cluster zoning in the bylaw. So that's why we have what we have, because there was no appetite for cluster zoning at all.
Yeah, it's a different kind of cluster, right?
Right,
Yeah.
so, I guess, are we just talking the multifamily section? You want to just take the multifamily section and rework that? Are we
That
talking
was the
about-
intent, I'll say.
That was what this was,
Within the planning board, there wasn't even unanimous consensus on what those changes should be.
Okay.
Certain people feel strongly about certain things.
It's probably more agreement that something needs to change rather than there's an agreement on what the
What it
change
should
should
Well,
be.
and I feel like in this model, we're gonna end up proposing the thing that everyone hates the least, as opposed to the option we all like the best, and that's a big discrepancy, right? Like, if we're just looking for minimum consensus, then we're gonna scrape by with whatever, and I don't think that sets anyone up, I don't think that sets the planning board up to make easier decisions in the future, or anything, it'll just ultimately make everyone's jobs harder.
But I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there. If we were to come up with something that addressed everything, which is what the intent was, we were unaware that we had legal counsel support, should we want it to clarify some of the language or cross references or whatever it may be, that would be great to get some third-party review of it. But again, I don't know how we do that if the zoning board doesn't agree with what the changes with the planning board should be, and if the Board of Health feels otherwise, or the Conservation Commission feels otherwise.
Which is why we unfortunately tried to have a review committee, but that basically lies dormant because so many of the parties are involved in the litigation that we don't talk about. Or are family members of the parties that are involved in it. We don't talk about.
And again, like, I went to the public hearing in between that and like multiple things of this. I personally don't feel comfortable being able to make recommendations on any of these because none of the and again, this isn't about any one person or anyone's intelligence or anything like that. But none of the conversations helped me clarify any of this, except to just kind of point out that we're all aware that there's inconsistencies, and I think that, like, from my perspective, in good faith, I can't make recommendations on things that aren't clear to me.
And whether or not they're clear or unclear, I think the thing that is clear here is that the way that these were written is that it's intended to solidify certain requirements that are interpreted a certain way in the zoning ordinance, which basically is the, one lot per one house. That's one of the things that's attempted to be clarified. And also, you know, the minimum acreage and things like what the frontage requirements are for these development parcels. I think those are the things that are intended to be clarified, and, you know, if you read it, I think you can infer what direction the clarification is intended to go.
So I guess my question is, on a multi-family development, what is one lot?
What is that gonna?
Because that was, it's like a 10-acre parcel.
So the way that these are written, the intent is that prior to any sort of subdivision or any lands or lot
Because we're trying to
manipulation, the
circle
intent is that
around.
you need to have at least a 10-acre parcel of land. That 10-acre parcel of land needs to have the required frontage, which is the 150 feet, I think it is, to qualify as being eligible for a multifamily development.
Right.
At that point, you could build, if you have 20 acres and it's all upland, you could build one building with 20 units in it. If you wanted to, you could then subdivide that property such that each new resulting parcel would have the required frontage and dimensional requirements for a lot as defined by the town dimensional tables.
So you would have
And
to
then
take
you would
that
have a
10
house, you would
acres.
have a unit on each one of those newly created lots, but those lots themselves are not going to be 10 acres as long as you started with that.
With the 10 acres, but you would then have to do 40,000 square foot lots
Correct,
and could
for
only
each
put-
individual building.
for each building, but not each unit or each unit.
No, each building, so you
Each
could do,
building,
you could
so-
create 2 lots, each have 10 buildings. You could create 5 lots, each with 2 buildings.
So what if I had a 10-acre parcel, and let's just say I have 10 acres left after I put my road in, my private way, all right? So now, or 10, 40,000 square feet, I put 10 buildings in there, but each of those buildings can only have 1 unit in it?
No, the total density is whatever that calculation was prior to development. So if starting with 10 acres, or I guess in this case, maybe like 12 acres, if you've got 10
Yeah.
lots when you're all done, then you'd be able to build 12 total units. It doesn't matter how many units are in the
Right.
building, you know, one building
But
with.
if I wanted 10 buildings, then each building could only have 1 unit, right?
Correct, and at that point, you might as well just do a single family.
Subdivision.
Yeah, you would be a subdivision.
Yeah.
And then you'd be prohibited because you've still got a regulation that says 800, I think 800 feet is the longest subdivision road.
Thousand.
Is it 1,000? Yes, so 1,000.
Well, that's what it used to be. I don't know.
Whatever the number is.
Yeah, so it's 1,000, so that would prohibit
Sorry.
development. So that's the confusing part, so. We can go on
I used
like
to be
this.
secretary of planning and zoning. I used to have good knowledge of the zoning bylaws. I haven't seen it for a while.
The way it's currently written, that's kind of sort of how it reads, is that's
Yeah.
what's required today.
And I never
But
did
there's a
understand.
lot of interpretation. I think it's silly the way that it's written, and having lot lines for the individual buildings seems like it's unnecessary and complicates now. That's the way it's currently written. So
Right.
we're trying to take what we believe in the text of the original bylaw was, however that was created. And
It just says we need to start from scratch.
So maybe we're looking for an article at the actual town meeting to fund some zoning research.
Things get changed, and get sued.
Yeah.
That costs us
I
money.
mean, does,
At least now you know the need
That's
for it,
like
right?
the short
So the article comes.
That's why when they said like, council wasn't.
Well, that's the thing, and like I said, I think, you know, we're just gonna keep chasing ourselves, or chasing the previous iteration of the board that made the decision and the town meeting that approved it.
Right,
And
and no matter how hard Carlos tries to word it correctly, there's always a catch in these zonings, and there's always another section over here that, oops, we didn't include that. or-
Yeah, and that's the problem.
And unless you're looking at the whole picture.
When you're looking at zoning, now you gotta make sure you're in the Board of Health area too.
yeah.
With Title V, if you're in a nitrogen loading area and you've got, like you said, you got one lot, and multiple buildings, but you might not be able to under Title V because of nitrogen loading, so there's a lot that comes in.
Yeah.
It just needs a major overhaul with, professional eyes and.
And again, that's not to, we really appreciate you folks sitting with us and helping us work through these articles. Like we would have, if you hadn't been here, we would have just had the same kind of conversation amongst ourselves and not had any clarification. So we really, really appreciate it.
And it's a little tough when you read this and you change 3 words and you have to read, 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, to find the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially town meeting, a lot of people look at that and say, what am I supposed to be looking for?
Yeah, right. You just cut and pasted the same thing. Yeah.
So like, for example, Article 11, all we did was add multifamily development to the list of things that was subject to site plan requirements.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know that by looking at that.
Yeah.
And the only reason we added it was because it wasn't explicitly identified as one of those things that required site plan review, even in other parts of the bylaw. It alludes to the fact that it does need a site plan review.
Yeah.
And this particular section that applies to site plan review doesn't actually call that out as something that needed. So that was just an attempt to try and add that.
Yeah.
And then just to close the loop, Article 12, we're actually decreasing the spacing between multifamily buildings, but if they don't have to be on separate lots, then that wouldn't really apply anyhow.
Right.
Inherently, it would be where the side yard setback is, which I think is 30 feet, so we have 60 feet naturally between buildings anyway. And that's it.
So if we don't make these changes, what are the implications for these lawsuits that we're just?
Well, I can talk with council. This is me saying this, I'm not playing even on TV. All the plans or anything went in and were approved one way or the other. There's a lot of dispute on whether they should have been approved, whatever. So that's not cool. They go under the bylaws that were in existence at the time they were approved. We can check with council, make sure, but I don't think changing the bylaws now changes the actual case itself, in the sense of the parties can't then say, well, the town just changed the bylaw last month and now it applies to this particular development that went in 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You can't,
Gonna work.
you can't.
I was thinking going forward.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, obviously there's a fundamental dispute about lot lines in multifamily. And I understand Carlos's point of trying to get the language that's in the bylaw to read the same in various places, but reinforces that dispute. So I don't think it changes the court cases. I think it's going to still leave us in a place that where the chair of the planning board has said very specifically that the lot lines stipulation was put in after Twin Lakes and after Halifax Meadows were built, and we have lawsuits about those.
Both of those were built in both lawsuits.
Yeah, and we lost on both of those. That was there to discourage multifamily housing, which, you know, if you want to discourage it, fine, just do away with it. I'm not saying you should, I'm just saying you don't discourage something, either you permit it or you don't permit it.
Yeah.
When I worked for the zoning board and planning board, I was told by the state, if you're going to have a bylaw that allows something, then you have to have conditions that actually allow it.
Yeah.
You can't say we allow a two-family house, but only, you know, someplace where residents aren't allowed. You know, he said that you can't say something is an allowed use and then make it so restrictive that it couldn't actually happen.
Yeah.
So if you're going to allow multifamily development, you have to make it so it can actually happen rather than trying to restrict it.
And in general, multifamily developments, either they're apartments or they're condos, they don't have lot lines between the buildings.
Yeah.
Yes, theoretically, you could pull it off, but I suspect if you check most condo developments, not just here in Halifax, but elsewhere, you'll never see that. That's what the bylaw says right now. I wrote that in 14, so.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions about the articles marked proposed by planning board? Carlos, you're of course welcome to stay, but we appreciate you answering questions. You don't have to. You're welcome to. I'm saying.
You have a 5 o'clock wake up call.
Did the planning board recommendations
No.
on the,
No, I think
They haven't
everything's
done
either
it.
gonna be at town meeting or
Or
at the
18th.
next hearing that we have.
what is your experience?
We have a meeting on the 18th.
They have a meeting on the 18th.
Yeah, so because what the discussion on these items was, it was closed, wasn't it? Public discussion.
Hearing's been closed.
And then we're gonna deliberate and we'll see what happens. If I was a gambling man, I would guess it's probably gonna get kicked till,
Yours.
town meeting,
Yeah,
Kick, I mean, kick to the special, kick to May.
No, our recommendation will get kicked to the.
To the next town meeting.
You're gonna pass over.
the 21st.
Yeah, I would guess that's how it's gonna.
Sorry, which way?
I don't think that we're gonna make a recommendation one way or the other at the meeting at the 18th.
So you probably move to pass over.
Well,
That's-
they could technically meet before the town meeting on the
And make
21st.
I don't know if there's a strong appetite for anybody to take a position that
So the
might be
appropriate,
in people's
appropriate,
best interest.
All right,
appropriate thing might be to pass over the articles once they get on.
So you don't want them voting down.
right, no, but
Right,
on the
because that would-
select, I'm passed, I moved on to the selectmen articles. They haven't made any recommendations yet on these.
No.
Do you
know,
think
they
that they'll,
intend to?
you don't know if they intend to?
I don't know.
Usually, or it used to be, at town meeting zoning articles, first ask the finance committee recommendation, and then they used to ask the planning board recommendation, right? So just so that you know, you may be asked on town meeting floor,
Yeah,
what the
will be.
planning board recommendation is on the selectmen articles as well as wrong, but,
And I think we'll
So-
deliberate these at the next
Yeah.
meeting, and I shouldn't speak for the other members, but I don't know that there will be strong.
right, I'm not asking you to tell us what they're gonna say or anything, I'm just saying, be ready that you'll probably be asked.
Yep.
And so whoever's at town meeting, be ready to at least give a recommendation.
Yep.
Or to say we didn't make a recommendation.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
it's, All right, thanks, have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if folks have the appetite for a few more minutes of work, I'm thinking we could take care of some of the articles, make recommendations on the ones proposed by the Board of Selectmen or other entities in town that don't involve,
Multifamily dwellings.
yeah. Numbers and stuff, like let's do money stuff.
Too many articles.
Oh, we also
These are
have some-
related,
we
right?
al- We also have some zoning articles that don't deal with multifamily.
Yeah, we have the marijuana ones. Well, maybe, okay, so Article 21 is the stormwater, so we said we're gonna wait on that. I'm just like, let's work backwards and make ourselves feel accomplished. Article 20, to see if the town will vote to accept ownership of map 20 lot 950 Halifax.
This is on Bow Street, the owner just wants to get rid of it to the town, it's cheaper us doing it this way than go through, tax sale and foreclosure.
Okay. Any
Where
other,
is that, Charlie on Bow Street? What's long?
It's on the paper street part of Bow Street.
I don't have the town meeting articles here. I did see
Well,
that.
that's why I just gave you a copy. Yeah, I was handing them out.
does
If you don't have
anyone,
them, pass them down.
does anyone have any other questions for
Well,
Charlie?
you had it in your hand, that's
Yeah.
why you looked at me saying, I already got it. Sandy's passing it.
They mixed up.
Does anyone have questions for Charlie about Article 20?
If you don't have them all, just.
Okay, here we go.
You got it.
Yep.
What's the plan after we accept ownership?
Sorry,
After accepting ownership, Charlie, do we just,
we just let it sit, it's useless,
okay.
it's a garbage. That's why the person doesn't want it. It's a postage stamp lot, and pay the taxes. And the taxes are $100 a year or something.
All right, I'll entertain a motion regarding Article 20.
Make a motion to recommend.
I'll second
Then moved and second. Any further questions? All those in favor?
that.
All right, so Finance Committee recommends on the 4-0. Article 19, to see if the town will vote to transfer $30,000 from available funds to the unemployment fund or take any action thereon. This is to make up that deficit because more was drawn out of the unemployment fund than we had originally projected, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we still have the possibility of, I think it was about another 16 to 20,000. So this will cover what we need and a little more than what we need.
Okay.
And we're taking it from There was an article on the books for the school feasibility study. We had
Yeah.
about 43,000,
Mhm.
45,000 left in it.
Mhm.
So we're taking 30,000 from that.
Any other questions for you, Charlie? I'll entertain a motion on Article 19.
Make a motion to recommend.
Second.
Moved in second. Any further questions? All those in favor? Aye. All those, oh,
Sorry.
It's okay. Okay, Finance Committee recommends. Article 18, to see if the town will vote to transfer $75,000 from stabilization to pay Plymouth County for its share of land marked as parcel A and parcel B, as shown as Plan Book 35, page 240 of the Plymouth County Registry of Deeds, and that any money transferred from stabilization fund for any said purpose shall be returned to the stabilization fund upon receipt of any funds from the sale of such land to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and that the town authorize the Board of Selectmen to sell such land to the Commonwealth or take any other action thereon.
So the idea here is that we've been thinking about doing this for decades now, but counting all the ducks that line up in the correct row.
Yeah.
If you go down Aldana, not all the way down to the dog pound, but just where the dog pound was, but a couple of parcels before that, on the south side of Aldana. There are two parcels that abut Peterson Swamp that the state's interested in, but the parcels were given to the town and the inhabitants of Plymouth County, AKA Plymouth County. So Plymouth County owns an interest, we own an interest.
Yeah.
The state, however, wants to be making deals with the town of Halifax because of our past history. They're still looking to give us money that they should have given us, so we're wanting to sell them land. But in order to sell the land, we have to buy Plymouth County's interest in those parcels.
Yeah.
So if we appropriate the money, we buy the interest from Plymouth County. We now own both parcels and entirely. We sell them to the state. The state gives us money back. That money goes back into the stabilization fund. And with more than that, more than 75, I think it's going to be, I think we've been talking 150 because Plymouth owns half of it, so.
Yeah.
Now, as part of that other transaction, and I know we won't be dealing with it this way, but 17 is part of the whole deal.
Yeah.
In essence, we're going to take a sliver along the southern boundary between where the right-of-way right now is for Aldana and where the state owns land, so that we can then have sufficient width if someday we have a large sum of money and want to make significant improvements to Aldana Road.
Yeah.
AKA get it out of the dirt road that we have right now.
Right.
The only way of doing that properly is to have sufficient width for the right of way, and the way to do that is to get the land from the state.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things in motion, but where we would end up with is more money in our coffers, less land in those parcels, but also the width of Aldana Road necessary to do road work there someday.
Okay. Any other questions on Article 18? I'll entertain a motion regarding Article 18.
I'll make a motion to recommend.
Second the motion.
Motion and second. Any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Finance Committee recommends on a 4-0. Article 17, as Charlie mentioned, is the other part of this land sale. This would just be the transfer ownership. Anyone have questions for Charlie on Article 17? I'll entertain a motion on Article 17.
Motion to accept.
No questions. I'll make a motion to recommend.
Motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Article 16 is proposed by the police chief. So I'll let everyone take a moment. So the questions whether or not the finance committee will vote to recommend is written.
So Bert turned 65 a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So he's retired now from the sheriff's office. He's officially retired from our police department. However, the police chief would like to reinstall him as a special police officer for either up till 2026 or until he wants to leave or until he is no longer capable of doing the job, whichever of those three comes first.
I assume that the police chief has factored all this into his operating budget and
Yeah, it's a special, we just work
Yeah.
with, I mean,
yeah, right,
Like holidays and
Bert's been a
Yeah.
special all these years, so it's
Yeah.
really not gonna change.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'll entertain a motion on Article 16.
I'll make a motion to recommend.
Second.
Moved in second, any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Finance Committee recommends. Article 15, to see if the town will vote to transfer $2,369.85 from available funds to pay unpaid bills from KP Law from FY19. Take any action thereon.
Yes.
Should be ready.
I'll make a motion to recommend. Unless there's discussion.
Yeah, what happened here simply is, I'm not sure where the disconnect was. I don't remember ever seeing this bill. This was a bill from March that I never saw it at all. Nobody in the office saw it. And then they called us about a month ago and said, hey, you didn't pay us. I said, well, you didn't send us a bill.
Yeah.
So
Is this gonna be a 9/10 vote? Okay.
hopefully less rancorous than it was.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, you're gonna hear the exact same argument the last time.
Hopefully not.
We're going to take this money again from the same article,
Yeah.
It's not going to be.
rather than taking it from
Yeah.
the current law account, because who knows how much money we're gonna need on that,
Right.
so.
And no, it's just gonna
And
go up.
we don't take it from the
Just say
veterans
no.
account. Yeah, we didn't make a slush fund. Alright,
With bills and bills.
I'll entertain a recommendation, a motion to recommend Article 15.
So moved.
Seconded.
14, just to cut to the chase, pass over this. There's no agreement yet, so we're not dealing with it.
Okay, so let's take a vote, Article 15, vote to recommend, all those in favor?
Aye.
Alright, that's a 4-0. Finance Committee, I'll entertain a motion to pass over Article 14.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All those in favor to pass over?
Aye.
Alright. Article 13,
The state legislature in its infinite wisdom had not approved the Chapter 90 bond. By the time we had a town meeting in May, it has since done that, so now we can get the money.
Okay.
I've heard good rumors about Chapter 90 stuff going forward.
We might get, there might be another
Yeah,
chunk of change.
yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, that would be nice.
yeah, that's what the
would be
MMA
nice.
folks were saying.
So then you could do all day notebook.
Everybody helps.
Right, I'll entertain a motion on Article 13.
So we're not gonna transfer anything from available funds?
Right, zero.
Is that gonna stay
Yeah,
there, or is that
yeah.
gonna oh, it's already there, right?
In essence, yeah, it's sitting up in the state coffers.
Yeah,
We have to send in project forms and then get reimbursed. But that money is sitting waiting for us to send the proper forms.
I'll make a motion to recommend.
Second.
moved and seconded, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Alright, Finance Committee recommend 4-0. My inclination is let's wait on Articles 7 through 12, which were the ones we just discussed that came out of, planning board. We can punt those to, before the special, just in case anything else comes out of
Yeah.
our discussion, or any discussions that we hear about. Let's go back to Article 1. If everyone's okay to go for another like 15 minutes, that's not okay? Alright. Article 1, to see if the town will vote to amend Chapter 167-7 zoning schedule of use regulations regarding marijuana establishments. So the change looks like,
So it would be allowed in the business district
okay,
by special permit.
okay.
This came up last year, get my boards right. If the planning board does not recommend this, it can't be voted on at town meeting because the same article was voted on at the May 2018 town meeting under state statute.
Right.
You can't vote on the same matter on zoning without a 2-year break.
Okay.
But there's an exception. If the planning board's recommending it, it can be voted. So we'll see if they make any recommendations. If they recommend this, it can be voted on at town meeting.
Okay. So maybe we'll hold on Article 1 because we might just end up passing over. Okay.
I just got one comment on Article be 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
What they're proposing is, from what I understand, a petition, citizen's petition, is to allow the marijuana establishments in the business district.
Yeah.
And I really think that's too broad. I'm thinking, I'm just personally not from the Board of Health. I mean, I own business property, so it'd be an advantage. Because with special permit, I could have one of these in my backyard. My opinion is that with marijuana, they're gonna go find it. So the argument that it should be in any district, I don't buy, because if it's in an industrial district with a lot of commercial vehicles, that's where your traffic's gonna go. If they don't wanna buy it, they'll go to the industrial districts to do it. And we have 3, maybe 4 industrial districts in town, and it's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think I'm just wondering the impact on other businesses, because if, we're talking about a popular industry, like, we'll see how all the kind of other conversations around some of the, vaping and stuff like that go, but I would think it would be a boon to businesses located nearby who would want an increase, especially in an area where we don't have the benefit of being near major roadways, to have that added foot traffic or added traffic essentially being brought by your business because people are on their way to another one.
Is there proof that that actually happens now? I mean,
Colorado, yeah.
So are you thinking that if you have it in the business district that you'd be okay?
You think they're
generate
gonna-
more traffic for the other businesses?
Yeah, and
You
again,
think they're gonna take
No.
their $300 and then say, I'm not gonna spend 300 here, I'm gonna spend 250 here and 50
No, I mean,
over there? 'Cause that ain't gonna happen.
I'm
Someone might want to go out to eat after they finish.
and also, I think from being out in Western Mass, this feels more provincial in that, like, in Western Mass, like, there are the establishments right near, like, bunch of other businesses, and people do park in the parking garage and walk downtown and go to the bakery or go to the coffee shop and go to the like whatever.
It's one of their errands, or
Right, it's not unlike, oh, I'm gonna go pick up a bottle of wine to go to a dinner party, I'm gonna stop at this place and go get a cake to bring and something else. So I think that's
Yeah,
my
in towns where you
experience
can
is
just
far
walk
less
down the
sort of.
street and all the businesses there.
I
Like,
think the makeup of the town though, because you have residences that can be built in business districts, which is a little unique. But we offer that in Halifax. So again, I think the traffic that it generates, and I'm not opposed to having the marijuana establishments. I just think that they will go and find it into, our business districts are around Route 58, Route 106. There probably wouldn't be anything on 106 because of the distances to alcohol establishments and churches. But, I mean, you potentially could have something in that corridor, and those districts are only 300 to 500 feet deep.
Yeah, I'm just thinking,
And I don't
Yeah,
know
you-
that if you're gonna go in and buy marijuana, if you're gonna stop at the liquor store and get something to drink, where you're gonna stop at
no,
the-
and I'm
the
thinking
snacks.
where the places I go to the gym, for example, are usually zoned industrial. So I'm driving into these big industrial parks to get to the weightlifting place, and it is a bit off-putting to have to go there to conduct normal legal business, right? So I think if you want to increase the tax revenue and all that kind of stuff, we would want to make it more attractive for people to go to places as opposed to less attractive. I mean, if you're right, I still drive around the back of factories to get to my weightlifting place. I go, but it'd be a lot nicer if I didn't have to do that. But I understand everyone's kind of point.
I'm just worried also about, because there are also guidelines with regards to certain, like with a daycare or something like that.
well, you have
Right.
to be 500
Daycares,
feet away from any
liquor.
school.
Right, so if we sit there and say, okay, we're okay with this in a business, then we're also eliminating the potential of those businesses going in there because of the guidelines of you have to be within a certain distance of.
Well, the regulation is on the pot shop, not on the daycare center. So what happens, Charlie? Then if there's a pot shop and the daycare center decides to move
I
it
don't
next
know what
door?
will happen.
Yeah,
But we can't then
Doesn't
tell the
look
pot
like
shop
there
we
is
have
any
to
around here,
close,
so-
right?
No.
So,
no.
Right, so that would mean that they would probably say, we're not gonna go here because, so we'll lose that potential business.
so
Whereas if they're in the industrial, I don't think a daycare is gonna be going to the industrial.
No.
part.
Well, actually, we
we
do.
have one,
Yeah.
Well, way down there,
Yeah.
Magic.
right,
Which
but
is-
that's right at the edge of town.
Which is the only place that is on a state road
Yeah,
that has a significant industrial space and they can't use it for this because
Because
of
the
the
school
daycare.
is there, right? Yeah.
No one's going down the River Street if you put a shop down there. Sorry to say.
Well, there is Route 58, there's industrial land
Yeah,
on
right
Route
at the Clinton
58,
line, right.
where the cell tower
Yes.
is. So you could put one right there.
Yep.
Alright.
Left
I think 105 is a fairly decent road. If they wanted it, they'd get on
It's
105.
near, no one's going.
Well, there's an awful lot of wetland down there, it's really hard to.
Well, no, all those old folks down at
Where are the 20 or so stores that
They
exist?
would read down the
They're
street.
not.
My stores in town here, you heard me about.
I mean, we have empty storefronts
I
in
mean,
town.
got a
you
whole
know,
block
like
up
we-
there that's empty.
We have empty storefronts only because the owners don't want to do anything with them. We're
Yeah,
talking about the Cumbie's Plaza, that's
Right.
been empty for
They don't want
15
Somebody
years.
wanted.
They wanted 1.2 million
yeah.
when BR's moved out of there 20 years ago, and I think they want the same, and the building's not.
Nothing,
Well,
yeah.
it needs to be torn down.
Yeah, and on the other side of the street, they won't allow any food establishments to go in the rest of that plaza
Yeah.
because Cumbie sells food.
Yeah,
So, that's why we have vacant storefronts.
yeah,
It's that management.
Just sad, it's sad.
yeah.
So Article 1 makes it less restrictive, allowing it in the business zone. And then Article 2 is actually making it more restrictive.
Yeah, it may eliminate almost every single place in town.
Yeah, and I'm not for that.
Yeah. So if we want, we can either talk about these today, or we can, I mean, we have done about a third so far of the articles. We've done 13 through 20.
Well, I can tell you, if you can look at 3,
Yeah,
that's just correcting the typo that was put in, or either that or a large change in numbering.
yeah,
What brings that into compliance with the general laws.
okay. So I'll entertain, we'll give everyone a moment, and then I'll entertain a motion to recommend Article 3 as written.
So you just changed it from 94H to 94G?
94G, yeah.
Okay.
Motion to accept.
So we have a motion to the Finance Committee to recommend.
Second.
Motion to second, any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
4 is set up a situation, we've been trying to change the language, and we missed this one word on the in-law apartments. So right now, it's every 5 years you have to get a new special permit.
Renewed.
The idea is it has to be reviewed, make sure that it's in
Yeah.
compliance, but they don't have to go through
Renewed.
the public hearing process
Okay,
and everything like that. If an abutter thinks in fact it's not in compliance, the abutter has every right to go right straight to the building inspector today, tomorrow, next day, and say, I don't think it's in compliance, it has nothing to do with reviewing or anything. The person could say, I don't think they're meeting the stipulation in their permit, so it doesn't eliminate the rights of the abutters.
I'll entertain a motion on Article 4.
I'll make a motion to recommend.
Second.
Moved and seconded, any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay,
5 is, more multifamily, I'm trying to eliminate a discontinuity in the bylaw, but if we're not gonna deal with multifamily, then
yeah.
I can live with the discontinuity. It's still, it does make me happy, but I got other things.
6
Okay, so the
for
other
abandonment.
is, I'll give you an example. We've got, I think it's 6 Upton Street. We have a tiny house on there. It's been abandoned basically for a couple of decades. We finally got through the foreclosure process. Fine, we foreclose on it, try and sell it. It's very, of no value if it can't be built on. But right now, it's certainly, the house has been abandoned, the use has been abandoned. It's a substandard lot, can't be built on again. This would allow a special permit process for allowing someone to put in a new house.
Okay.
That would bring us to get it back on the tax, so we could sell it to someone who would intend, we would think would
Don't you
intend
rip
to
it
do
down and
that.
build?
Yeah. Okay. I'll entertain a motion on Article 6.
I'll make a motion to recommend.
Seconded.
Moved and second, any further questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, and I think we can save the rest for Because I think we posted for 6 PM, so that gives us an hour and a half before the meeting starts, so that gives us a good amount of time to, have discussions about zoning. We'll get updates on anything that's happened between now and then, and we can have sort of a more protracted discussion about the, earlier zoning articles, when I think we're all a little bit fresher. The only other things I have tonight, pull my agenda back up. Confirm the meeting date of 12/9/19 with the Tri-Town Finance Committee. So Linda was nice enough to get that organized. So that would be December 9th, and I think we talked about booking the Great Hall for that. If we could, just to make sure we have enough space for everybody. So if folks are around and available, if you can
What
work.
time, 7?
Yeah, I think she said for 7. Double check. Date of 12/9 works. I told them we would host. Currently, they have penciled in 12/9 at 7 PM here at Town Hall for the committees.
Okay.
Okay. So many thanks for that. I think we can punt on the discussion of liaisons, which is kind of get through the special, and then maybe right after the special, we'll get into the liaison appointments if that works for everybody. Correspondence and mail. The correspondence we have is the notification that Cheryl has been appointed to the Finance Committee, so welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so your first meeting, it was a long one. We also have an order confirmation for the MMA for Cheryl to attend the ETFC. I'm gonna go as well, so maybe we'll handle those bills together because I think we both chose to have them billed at the actual event. Or did you prepay?
I didn't prepay, no. they
Okay,
did it for
yeah,
me.
good.
Yeah.
Then we'll get billed at the event and we can bring the bills back here. And that'll be, anyone else who wants to go, it's October 26th. It's right over Bridgewater State. And it's a great, there's gonna be some great panels for that. No reserve fund transfers. The calendar, we know our next meeting is October 21st at 6 PM. We'll be over at the school for that. And I'll put out a reminder email, so that we don't end up coming here by accident. Public participation. Anybody? All right, I will entertain a motion at 8:48 PM.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.